Well, good day, everybody. Welcome back to the channel. Okay, so I've been messing around a little bit with some creative stuff in the last few days. It started with an entry in my sketch journal, and this goes back to a few years when I got interested in the idea of a viewing frame that you could hold up and you could frame different scenes and kind of get in your imagination, get an idea for composition just by putting frames around the scene, excluding everything else around it, and just having one fixed point of view. The focal length is sort of like the distance from your eye to the frame. So this is not anything new. If you go back to the 1970s and 80s, there was a gentleman named Fred Picker who started Zone 6 Studios, and one of the things that he used in teaching a large format photography was he had a viewing filter, and his viewing filter was around, it looked like a camera filter. It was an amber colored glass, and it had a rectangular opening in it that was the same aspect ratio of 4x5 or 8x10 film. It had a metal ring and it had a lanyard. You could hang it around your neck, but you could go out and you could pre-visualize the landscape, the scenery. The amber colored glass would kind of give you a simulated monochrome tonal range, similar to what black and white film might see. It was a viewing frame, right? So you could kind of figure out where you might find a perspective view without having to lug your big camera and tripod around. Okay, that was what Fred Picker did. But if you go back even further in time, back in the 1950s, Sister Corita Kent was a Catholic nun in Los Angeles, and she taught art, and she was actually a serigraphist. She was widely recognized. There is a wonderful documentary about Sister Corita. I'm going to put a link down below. I would recommend you guys watch that. She was a great artist and teacher. But one of the things that she did, and is evident in that documentary, is she would take her students out to the streets of Los Angeles with little pieces of paper that had a little viewing window cut into them like this. And the idea that she used was to exclude everything else and just pick out an individual isolated subject matter, and then she would have them sketch that subject matter. And after I looked at that documentary, I thought, oh, that was pretty cool. That inspired me. So just a few years ago, I made this little viewing frame, and this is made from thin model aircraft plywood. It has this side, and the back side is painted black, and then there is a clothespin. And the idea that I was going with this was you would hold it up. It's sort of like an iPad, an iPad mini roughly, and you would find a scene, and then by clicking it, that's equivalent to isolating a moment in time. So you're actually sort of taking a mental photograph as a way of pre-visualizing composition, sort of learning how to find compositions. It was also kind of an experiment. This was a performance art a little bit, right? If you go out in public and do that, it's kind of like performance art, but it was also an experiment in learning to see. Well, so in my sketchbook back a few weeks ago, that was actually 28th of April, after watching the documentary on Sister Corita, I have this interesting little sketch I drew of a viewing frame, and it's sort of roughly the size and shape of a cell phone, a smartphone. It has a square window in the top, and then it has a area in the bottom for you to put a note card or a sketch paper, a little piece of sketch paper. And the idea is you would hold it in your hand, you would view a certain scene, and then you could actually sketch that scene out. Then last night I got interested in, well, we should do something about that. And so I started doing some sketches and some design work. And what I wanted was, I wanted the rectangular object to be the golden mean ratio, 1.618 to 1, right? And I wanted two square windows equal size. The top window is the viewing window. The bottom one is where the sketch paper slips into. And I had to figure out the dimensions of this. And I don't know necessarily what size this is going to be, so I wanted to be able to calculate all the various dimensions and how to lay this out, and I could scale it up or down. And I went through several iterations of this, of calculating how this works, until I came up with a calculation that actually works. So for the layout, I'd like to be able to define the size of the windows and then have the overall shape of it to be the golden mean. And I went through several different iterations before I came across this design here. So you supply the dimensions for the width of the window, of both windows, which I call W, and you also pick this X value, which is the border between the top, bottom, and middle. So all three of these borders are the same. And then it calculates what the height will be of the rectangle, which is 2W plus 3X, and it calculates the border width on the edges, which is what I call Y, and which is this part here. And then you also have the overall width of the actual frame, which is H divided by the golden mean of 1.618. And then I also went through and figured, well, since you're going to be cutting art paper, sketch paper down to size to fit into this frame, you want to know the size of that as well. So I have a couple little formulas for making the size of that. And so when you put it all together, you define a W, you define an X, and you calculate with these formulas all the other dimensions. All of these are in millimeters. I'm going to fractions of a millimeter in my dimensions, but of course I'm never going to be that accurate with measuring and cutting, but it's just the idea that I know what they are accurately. So that is my dimensions right here. Looking at the various examples I had, starting with a 50 millimeter window, which is roughly 2 inches, and starting with a 10 millimeter border here, it ends up being 130 millimeters high. The Y border is about 15 on the sides, and the width is about 80 and 80.3. So that looks like a pretty reasonable handheld size. I think I'm going to stick with the X as 10 dimension, and we'll go with these calculations here, which I've repeated down here. This includes the width and height of my sketch paper. I think what I want to do now is just make a prototype of the viewer using some cardstock that I have laying around. And here are the pieces of paper. They're pretty uniform. Okay, so now I need to cut out the 3 layers according to my dimensions that I've calculated. So those 3 layers are basically going to be like this. The bottom, which is the front of it, will have just the top window cut out. The middle one will have this pattern cut out, and the top will have this, which is basically 2 equal sized windows. There's also a couple little cutouts for your fingers to be able to pull the drawing cards out. All right, there are the lines for cutting out the window. Okay, so let's look and see how these layers stack up. So here is the front layer. Here is the inside layer that forms the pocket for the sketch paper. And this is the back or top layer. Okay, it looks like it's sufficiently dried. The rectangle that I cut out of the middle part, the middle layer, I only needed to trim a couple little pieces off of it to make it the right size for my art paper. Now, if you compare my original sketch here with what I ended up with, so I had in the original sketch, I had the drawing card slips in from the right side. Well, when I actually glued this together, you might have noticed I actually had the front layer reversed or flipped over, so it ended up being on the left side, and that's fine. It's just whatever you want to do, it works just as well that way. This prototype we just finished making is obviously a prototype. The grade of cardstock is a little thin, and I'd like to use a little bit thicker cardstock, at least for the middle layer, that would give me a thicker slot, a wider slot in the middle. So I have this chipboard. This is thin cardboard that I get at Michael's craft store that comes in letter size, 8.5 by 11 inch sheets. And so I have a few scraps of it that would work fine. And then for the top and bottom layers, I've been collecting recently a lot of advertisement flyers and newspapers and stuff, and I clip things out, I save things because I make these little zines now, and oftentimes the artwork in the advertisement flyers is it's fun for doing things like that. So this is a advertisement, a political flyer that came in the mail for a person running for Congressional District 1 here in New Mexico. Anyways, I noticed it had this kind of patriotic logo, red, white, and blue flag thing, and it is kind of a cardstock, and it's about the same thickness, maybe even thicker than this cardstock that I used for my prototype. So I thought it would be fun to make another one of these with this patriotic logo, and then the middle would be with this thicker cardstock. Now, another source for thin cardboard is cartons, right? So this is a cardboard carton from Orbit chewing gum. This front panel here of this carton is big enough for one of these things. And then the other option, of course, is cereal box cartons, right? There's plenty of artwork, plenty of areas that you can cut out a rectangle out of this stuff. So you don't have to go out to an art store and buy specialty kinds of cardstock and papers. Just use whatever you have around the house, recycle it into an art project. So in the case of the next one I'm going to make here, I think I'm going to use this patriotic cardstock, and then I'll use the Orbit chewing gum carton for the other side, which would be kind of an interesting mashup. I would actually like to use the Frosted Flakes carton, but it still has cereal in it, so... Well, there you go. We have Brother Joe's viewer patterned after Sister Corita's finder. Well, of course, if you want to do this for yourself, you don't have to go to the complexity that I've gone to in terms of these calculations for my template. But one advantage of having gone to the trouble of designing an ideal layout as far as my aesthetics go is not only do I get a golden mean ratio rectangle for the finder body, I can pick the size of a window and the borders I want. The nice thing is having these formulas is now I can scale the design up and down. So for instance, here is the standard one that we just made, a 50 millimeter window, 10 millimeter borders. Well, I went ahead and made one that was 25 millimeter window and 7.5 millimeter borders. Hey, look at that cute thing. Isn't that neat? So here you go. Two different size ones. They're both the same proportions. And I have all the formulas now that I can calculate any size I want. Pick a window size, a border size. It tells me everything, even the size of the art paper itself. I think that's pretty cool. So this is a mini size. This is more of a handheld, kind of a smartphone size finder with integral sketch pad. You take your nice mechanical pencil or whatever art pencil you want, and you can sit there and draw on it and everything. I think that's pretty cool. I think the interesting thing about when Sister Corita came up with this idea of the finder as just a window to look through to separate the clutter of the entire visual scenery down to one particular viewpoint from your single eye view. Well, what's interesting about it is it kind of resembles the idea of the camera obscura, which was a way of viewing using one-point perspective a landscape, and before the era of chemical photography, being able to fix that image by drawing, sketching, or painting from that view projected onto an internal view screen. I really think this is an interesting idea because it has a lot of the same concepts, right? You have a single-point perspective from your eye through the window of the viewer out to a scene, and then integral to the frame is a sketch surface that is the same size as the perspective you're seeing in the window, and you can then draw that. So the similarity to film photography is kind of striking, right? Because you're fixing an image or recording the image not with the action of photons upon silver halides, but the action of your hand and pen or pencil onto paper, which is an interesting idea, I think, and it does go back all the way to the fundamentals of photography itself. And what I've found about using a finder is when you isolate a certain scene, you'll all of a sudden start to notice if I make real subtle adjustments to the framing, up and down, left and right, angling it a little bit, you can sense how the composition starts to work better or not in terms of the balance in the four quadrants of the frame. Maybe there's too much empty space on one quadrant, too much clutter on the other. The lines, there's a tension maybe where lines intersect the edge and all that. There's a lot of principles of composition here that you can explore using this kind of a finder, and you'll be surprised how even the simplest setting has a lot of complexity to it as you find the ideal composition for that setting and then sketch it. You know, it's interesting, even if you're stuck at home around your domestic situation, you take one of these finders, you start walking around, you can find all kinds of interesting compositions that you might have otherwise not noticed. And you can sketch them right there, right on the device itself. It's really an interesting concept. I hope you guys go ahead and use this and play with it. I'd love to see you have fun with it. I'm going to drop a link down below, not only to the documentary about Sister Corita Kent, but I'll drop a link down below to a document of the formulas for calculating your own finder, for choosing the right dimensions and what all the measurements will be if you guys want to do that. Or you can just throw one together in whatever shape and size you want. You don't have to follow my dictates on this, but if you're curious, I'll have a link down below to that document. Okay, guys, well, it's been great doing this. It's been a lot of fun. It's been great sharing it with you. I hope you guys have fun with this. I hope this enables you to have a renaissance in your creativity by learning to see, learning to compose, which will help your photography or art or sketching or drawing or painting or whatever kind of art you do. Leave some comments down below. I'd love to hear your thoughts about it. I'd love to have a dialogue with you. And in the meantime, stay safe, stay creative. Have yourselves a great day. Bye-bye.